new episode of the All Walks of Life podcast. As you can see, I'm wearing my Liverpool top on today, and I'm really happy that Liverpool are back playing again. It's just one of the joys of my life that I get to watch the Reds play. So yeah, we recently drew against Everton, which was actually recorded as one of the most watched Premier League games ever. So that's pretty interesting, but it was a 0-0 draw, so probably not the best fixture to view for the viewers, I'd say. But yeah, I'm pretty positive about the Reds, and I just can't wait for us to lift the trophy and dig one up against my Mancunian friends who've kept on slating me for never having won the league in my lifetime at least, and in so many years for the other Reds that I know of. So yeah, we were playing Crystal Palace today, and I hope we get 3 points. But other than that, in today's episode of the podcast, I sat down with Ivan Ramos. He is a vegan just like myself. I'm not sure if I've spoken about why I turned vegan on my channel yet. But yeah, the reason why I went vegan was for more of the ethical reasons. I didn't feel it was right to kill animals just for our sensory pleasure. And today I speak to Ivan Ramos, who works for this company called Pro Veg International. So they are basically trying to create innovative ideas in plant-based foods so that it's readily available for the common man like you and I. And we just consume them rather than actually having to, let's say, rely on the meat-based products. He talks about how his reason was different to mine. However, ethics and morality did come to it later on when he discovered more and more about the animal food industry and just the horrors of it. The way the animals are treated and just the things we're doing for the environment through animal farming. He mentioned how he went vegan for the health benefits, which are obviously which obviously they just stare at you in the eyes when you actually even consider plant-based products versus meat products. Not to say meat products don't have their advantages, but when you actually weigh them up against plant-based products, I feel that plant-based products just outshine meat-based products in terms of most aspects when it comes to our lifestyle and diets. So yeah, we talked about veganism, we talked about, let's say, some of the more innovative ideas in veganism, and how is it even possible to say for us that the plant food industry can even compete with the animal industry, even if it seems a very difficult challenge, let's say now, but let's say in a couple of years time, will that actually be able to happen? So those were some of the questions we tackled on in this podcast, and yeah, hope you guys enjoy it. So here's the conversation. Alan, welcome to the All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Ishan. Great pleasure.
How have you been keeping yourself busy during the quarantine period then?
I think it's gone in waves a bit. I think that there's been times where I've had more of a let's go and get it attitude, and there's been times where it's more of a slump. But yeah, I think overall, as me and maybe a lot of other people have become more adapted, you kind of get into more of a routine, and you kind of figure what works for you and what doesn't, and you kind of stick to it. So staying busy with work, sometimes a bit more active with exercises, at times with some other extracurricular activities, but mostly busy with work though.
Right. No, that's great. And I was really interested to speak to you because I myself am a vegan, and this is something I really feel strongly about, and I want to bring a change in the society I live in, and I want to make people more aware of it. So just for the viewers, maybe if you can explain a little bit about the company you work for and just about yourself, and I'm assuming you're vegan as well if you're working for a company like ProVeg.
Yeah, I am. I've been on a plant-based diet for about 3 years now, almost. Before that, I spent a few years as a vegetarian, and then just a brief year before that, I was eating a little bit of fish as I was making my transition over. And for me, when I made the connection between our food choices and the environment, in my case, As as you're probably familiar with this plant-based diet, I mean, because it addresses all sorts of different issues, people do it for different reasons. So for me, I started more through a health perspective, and then started becoming more aware of the link that it had with the environment. So for me, it was very important, when I thought about my next steps in terms of a career, was to be aligned with a company that had the same values and that had the same vision. So the company that I work with is called Pro Veg International, and they're a food awareness organization present through a lot of countries in Europe, but also in the U.S. and South Africa, in China, and up until a few months ago, the plan was also to go to India. So they're pretty present, and they've been growing quite quickly. And the mission that they've set out for themselves is to reduce the global animal consumption by 50% by the year 2040, which is a huge task. It's a huge task, but with so many motivated people on the team, it's something that everybody works towards every day and strives for, and creates a very, very nice environment to be working in.
No, that sounds really great, because I mean, it's interesting to hear that you point that, let's say, you turned vegan because of the health benefits, and I hear many vegans who talk about the benefits of a plant-based diet, and how some people were struggling with aspects such as obesity or other such health problems, and they moved to a plant-based diet, and they saw a radical shift in the way they eat, and just in their lifestyle, basically. But my question to you here is, let's say, if there is a meat eater who comes to you, or if there is someone who's even a vegetarian who comes to you, what is the first thing you propagate? Do you say that go vegan for the health benefits, or would you say go vegan for the environment, or would you say, like me myself, the reason I went vegan was morally and ethically. I felt that, in my opinion, it wasn't right to take the life of another just so that I can enjoy a particular meal or clothing as such. So
Yeah.
what would you say to a meat eater or a vegetarian who may come to you?
I mean, I think it's tough. I mean, because it's always quite circumstantial and quite situational, depending on who you're talking to. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think that one thing that should relate, or could best relate with people, would be the environmental aspects, and the health aspects as well, because, like I said, I mentioned my reasons on how I came across veganism, but at the same time, because of the work environment that I'm in, and in my personal relationships too, I'm very close with people who switch for the same reasons you did, right? That they're these ethical vegans that are doing it for animal welfare, and obviously now that I'm more aware of these other very important parts as well. I've come to be very empathetic and sympathize with that as well, and understand the thought process behind it. But at the same time, I think that there are some countries and cultures that are more prone, or have more the ability to care about things like this. I mean, coming from my background, which is Mexican, the situation is very different. In Latin America, it's very hard for people to wake up and think about the animals. It's an ugly thing to say, but it's true. People are more concerned with other day-to-day things, like putting food on the table. So it's not that people don't want to care about the animals and don't want to care about animal welfare either, but it's just that it doesn't. There are more important things on their list. So if I were to come across a meat eater, I think that one thing that most people would be caring about would be their own health. And number two, I would want to think that it's also an environmental thing, right? Because I think that every other situation, every other problem that can be addressed or should be addressed, presupposes that there's a stable environment. And if we don't have that, if we're constantly, being faced with all these atrocities, environmentally, then it destabilizes everything else. So I would say that those would be my two main approaches for people.
I mean, I understand that, even though, I mean, it'd be very sad for me to hear that, let's say, another individual would probably consider maybe a health benefit more important than, let's say, the life of a being. It's just that it's just a secondary thing that, okay, so if I want to be healthy, it also caters to saving a life in that sense. I mean, but I can understand that because I see people who have grown up this way, and it's very difficult for, let's say, a vegan or anyone of this sort to just come up to you and say that, oh, your eating style is totally wrong, you should move towards this thing that I am subscribing to you. So I totally
Yeah.
understand that, because eating, as I mentioned to many people who come on the show, is that it's very important to us. It's like a part of ourselves. And for any stranger to come up and say that you should change the way you're looking at things, I think that's the wrong approach. And that's why I generally say is that you should always have a healthy conversation with the person you're speaking to, and just get to the bottom of things of why you feel veganism is the way to go. Do you understand where I'm
Definitely.
coming from?
Definitely, yeah, and I think that you bring up a great point, because I think that we're not born to to consume animals, but we're taught to,
Yeah.
right? And we become so disconnected from animals as being living sentient beings,
Yeah.
that we have to unlearn the things that we unlearned, and kind of connect again to other living beings. And I think that a lot of this unlearning is done in very specific circumstances. I mean, I think that it was a lot of the circles that I was around, a lot of the, I don't know, the literature, or many other different things that brought me to that not everybody has access to all the time. So I feel like it's hard for people to just, for mainstream crowd to unlearn these things that we all unfortunately were taught when we were growing up, across different cultures. But I think that one thing that I always try to do is, more so than be very dogmatic in someone's face, because, like you said, that's never going to be an effective way to go about it. But my thing has always been to try to lead by example, right? Lead by example. I mean, I love food. My Ever since I grew up, I mean, Mexican cuisine is super rich and colorful as well. So for me, now that I eat plant-based, it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy my food. I mean, I have great taste in food, and at the same time, I stay really active. I still have a pretty decent social life. So I say, hey, I'm able to have a very normal lifestyle. I'm super happy. I'm probably as fit as I've ever been in my life as well. I also came from a heavier background too. So for me, I try to lead by example and be like, hey, I'm able to enjoy all of these different things, and while I'm at it, I'm not hurting anybody, I'm not endangering anything. So that's always been my approach, to lead by example, and try to educate people that way, rather than put your finger in someone's face, because not everybody has that same opportunity to unlearn the things that you had to unlearn at some point as well.
No, that's a really interesting point that you talk about it. I mean, it's like it's almost second nature for us when we think about food, and animals just feel a part of it because that's how we've grown up. It's what our mothers have taught us. It's what our families have during traditions, and all these family traditions. So you start thinking that if it's celebrated on occasions such as Christmas in the West, or even aspects in the subcontinent in India and around, then how can you say that it's wrong to kill animals? So do you think it has to come from, let's say, a policy based approach, or maybe to start teaching kids about veganism in school, and then that's how you maybe grow the whole movement around? Or what do you think we can take measures in spreading the word, basically?
I mean, in spreading the word, I mean, I think that everybody who's aware of what's going on, like I said, not everybody has the opportunity, or maybe even the interest, right? Maybe I'm giving people too much credit. maybe people do have the opportunity and they just don't care. They don't want to make the connection. They don't want to make a change because, like you mentioned, I mean, food is a very intimate thing, and people don't want to, change the way that they've been feeding themselves, because it's linked to culture and family and etc. Uh, So I would say that when it comes to spreading the message, everybody who knows about these things has a personal responsibility to try and spread it as best they can. But I think when we talk about, systemic change and change in consciousness and mindset, as humanity, I think we have to hit it from everywhere. Because, I mean, if you just look at the world around us, everything is shaped around, seeing animals as commodities, right? Not seeing animals as other sentient beings that we share the planet with, but, as disposable commodities. So, you mentioned policy earlier. And I'm working at Pro Veg International, but I'm specifically focused on the corporate engagement. So we're looking at everything through the business perspective, right? So how can we put out better plant-based options onto the market? How do we give people that do not want to change their eating habits, really great tasting alternatives that they say, hey, you know what? I don't want to have my steak. I'll have this, seitan instead, right? But just to make sure that there's options that are available. But then you think about, one of these things that's really an issue for companies that want to produce plant-based products is price, right? Because I mean, if you look at all the meat products in the grocery aisles, the fact for me it's super nonsensical how the value chain for animals is so long. I mean, you have to grow the grains, you have to feed the cattle, you have to raise the cattle, you have to send them to here, you have to send them there. And then you go to the store and, the piece of meat is €2.49.
Yeah.
So you're like, how is that possible? How is that possible when, I don't know, if I want to get a jackfruit or if I want to get, a piece of tofu, that doesn't nearly go as long of a process, it costs the same thing or it costs even more, So it's because of the subsidies, right? All of these meat companies get subsidized by the government so that they're able to provide these prices. If it wasn't for that, then there's no way that meat would be less expensive than plant-based products.
Yes.
So I feel like that's where the policy comes into play, because you need regulation there too. You need, governments to stop putting money into these really, destructive industries and put them towards innovation, put them towards the future, put them in towards, more research and development, exploring more proteins. So that's where the play goes in there. And then on top of that, you have all the stuff that, NGOs like the Vegetarian Society, Pro Veg International, the Good Food Institute, that they're really communicating and putting campaigns, the January, all these different campaigns that are trying to raise awareness. Everything works together, right? Because if it's not for these campaigns, if it's not for these efforts that are raising awareness, then nobody finds out about these veggie burgers at the supermarket, right? Nobody finds out that there's a better way to eat. And at the same time, if there's no good veggie burgers in the supermarkets, then nobody cares about veganism too. Yeah. So I mean, everything is super interconnected, and you need to hit it from everywhere because it's all around us. So it's such a huge issue that needs to be addressed through all the different angles that are available.
No, I feel that's really powerful, and I think there are a lot of points to unpick here. So maybe let's see, when we talk about the whole subsidizing meat products and dairy products so that it's easier for the common man to use it in their daily consumption. So yeah, I think aspects such as the meat tax have been talked about. So I'd like to hear what your perspective is on that, because aspects such as the meat tax, or even applying meat as a commodity, like let's say what cigarettes are. So I'm not sure, because I study in the UK, and what happens with cigarettes there is that they aren't displayed in the supermarkets. They are kept in, let's say, they're kept in a reserve, and only when you ask for it will they say the particular brand that you want or the particular cigarette company that you want. I feel that if we don't display meat so readily available in supermarkets, I think the demand will go down. So I'd like to understand your perspective on that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that could be an option. I mean, if it's not right there for you, I mean, and you have to kind of dig for it a bit more, and maybe other alternatives are more present, then that, you know, can shift people in the direction to explore more plant-based alternatives. I mean, I think that now some of the more successful, you know, plant-based products that you see, you know, on the market are plant-based products that are positioned right next to the animal counterparts.
Yeah.
Right, and because for the longest time you had, you know, this vegan and vegetarian section at the end of the supermarket that nobody wanted to go to. Right, I mean, it was full of disgusting, you know, super bland, bad tasting food that nobody wanted to go check out. Right, but the moment that you put it next to the meat alternatives, sorry, the meat products, and you're like, oh wow, I mean, rather than having this piece of steak, I can have this other thing. Right, I mean, you have it right there to compare. So I think, you know, ultimately, you know, people have to eat, and people have to go get food, and unfortunately, you know, these transitions take time. Maybe, you know, doing measures like this, you know, hiding more of the meat products or making them harder to find would be an advantage. But at the same time, I mean, I don't think that we should underestimate, you know, how great these new plant-based products are coming out into the market, and say, hey, you know what, I mean, we can compete too, right? We can compete with the meat products, just put us next to it. And some retailers, some stores are still a bit hesitant to do that. But I think the more and more that people are, that, you know, businesses and stores and et cetera are open to do that, and people are able to compare, you know, two different products, then I think that things can improve a lot on that front as well.
No, I didn't actually consider that perspective, but that sounds a good one to take here. Like if the fact that there is, let's say, beef jerky that's kept, and then there's another plant-based alternative to, let's say, even lab-generated beef, or something along those lines, and a person would maybe consider that, okay, generally go for the beef jerky, but what's the harm in maybe giving this a shot? This is better for the environment, better for my health, maybe. So and once they do try that plant-based alternative, maybe they start liking it, and that's how I think change can occur. So I think that's a good I think that's a good way to look at things, and maybe more and more stores can start doing that. But one point I'd like to put forward here is that it's about, let's say, how the animal industry, or like the animal food industry rather, or the dairy industry, they promote certain research papers that propagate their agenda, basically. Or even to the supermarkets, as you said, that if you as a plant-based company would come and say that, just try putting us next to the animal food products. The animal food products, let's face it, they're much more superior, much more wealthier when it comes to the money they make. So they can easily come and just shove money to the faces of these supermarket stores and say that we don't want any of this, just we want ours on the first row, and aspects such as that. So what do you think about the income divide between the plant-based industry and the animal industry?
I mean, it's huge. I mean, I think that, like we mentioned before, I mean, with these subsidies, I mean, they have a huge advantage over plant-based companies. And on top of that, I mean, if we think about, you know, just when plant-based started to become a thing, I mean, I would say at least 3 years, maybe five. I mean, that it became kind of a thing, and that companies started to say, hey, we can make, you know, a business out of this. We can really, you know, take this off. You know, these are all very young companies trying to penetrate a very difficult space, you know, and they're coming across, you know, huge conglomerates that have been around for years and years and years and years, that have completely been unquestioned, right? Unquestioned, and these huge campaigns, you know, that protein is good for you, and that it's healthy, and this and that, you know, it's super long-standing campaigns, and a lot of government support, and just the story that society has been told, that it's normal to just consume these products. So I feel like the meat industry has basically had, you know, just an open gate to that for the past few years. It's only been the last 3 to 5 that they've been seeing some contention. So it's very hard to grow a company, you know, in that amount of time, to be able to really start challenging the bigger ones. But I think every year we've seen more boom in the plant-based industry, very correspondingly with that growth, you see decreases in the profits of the meat companies as well. They're seeing drops in their sales, they're seeing drops in their consumption. So yeah, I feel like it'll take a little bit of time, but I think that we're heading in the right direction.
No, I feel too as well because as I mentioned, I go to university in the UK, and from what I've read, and it's actually very it's very evident when I walk into supermarkets, when I walk into a Tesco's, I see that the dairy industry in particular is struggling really. So I mean, and I'm not sure, but you may know about this. So the dairy industry have heavily invested in, let's say, soy-based milk products and almond-based milk products because they've seen the decrease in the consumption of cow milk basically. So do you think that animal food industries will also maybe start investing in plant-based industries if they see profit in them? Because I feel most of them operate in the way they do is because of profit margins, and they don't really care about, let's say, the health aspect or morals or ethics or things like that. So if they see, let's say, that plant-based products are giving us profits, do you think they will actually consider it as a viable option?
Definitely. I mean, I think that they already are. I mean, they already are. It's in the work that I'm doing currently, we have all sorts of workshops and trainings and etc. for everything in the food industry. And one of our speakers said it quite nice recently. He said, the meat industry knows that they're done, that they're done. The dairy industry knows that they're done. I mean, I don't know how much of an overstatement that is, but they definitely know that change is coming. They definitely know that change is coming. If you look at some of the reports that are coming out these days, right now, I think that the market share, for just global meat, for plant-based products, I think it's still under like around 5%. I mean, it's still quite low, but by 2030, I mean, they're projecting that we'll capture about 30% of that market. And then by 2040, about 60%.
Wow.
So, I mean, all these reports are widespread, right? All these reports are widespread. You're seeing some of, these meat websites and meat magazines putting out advertisements and news also on plant-based because they know it's coming. It's a sector that they cannot ignore anymore. And it's not the vegetarians and the vegans that are asking for it. It's not the vegetarians and vegans that are generating the change, but it's all the people who are trying to reduce that are generating the change. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that these big companies don't have the same morals and values that these smaller plant-based companies seemingly do. But I mean, ultimately, when it comes to getting people on our side, I mean, what matters the most is that they're not, putting out these products, that they're not destroying the environment, that they're not hurting animals, that they're not putting people's health at risk, that they're not propagating this social injustice with the way that we grow food and distribute food. So I think what matters most is that they're just not doing it. We would all, in a perfect world, everybody would be doing it for ethical reasons, for environmental reasons, for health reasons. But you cannot expect that change of consciousness from these big companies. But if they want to see it on a profit basis, it's not ideal. But the animals don't care. The environment doesn't care why they're doing it or why they're not doing it. The only thing that matters is that they are doing it.
One particular word you used there was reduce, and I've actually seen a couple of interviews that Pro Veg has actually given, and they've actually talked about, let's say, flexitarians and reducitarians basically, of how even if you are a meat consumer, you should try to maybe have something like what's propagated in the West nowadays. It's called meatless Mondays or something, or a particular day in the week, or 2 or 3 days in the week where you don't consume meat or dairy products as such. So, as a vegan, would you propagate reducing, or would you say that you need to completely cut out animal products from your diet? How do you look at that scenario?
I mean, I think that everybody. I mean, like I said, because I'm in quite a circle of plant-based eaters and people who've been on this lifestyle for a long time. You have this spectrum. I have come across people who went vegan overnight, that watched this really unsettling documentaries, or read these very unsettling books, and boom, the next day they were onto chickpeas. Great props for them. Awesome that they were able to do it. For me, it wasn't that easy. For me, I first cut out meat, beef, chicken, pork, left fish. Because also you need at least for me now, I underestimate, or I forget how much I had to educate myself on how to eat properly, right? I mean, how to substitute things that actually you're nourishing yourself well. Because if you're used to eating, some animal protein with some rice and vegetables or whatever, if you take out the animal protein, you just have rice and vegetables, maybe that fills some people up, but I'm hungry in the next 45 minutes. So, I had to learn a little bit how to balance out my meals, and that took me a little bit. So that's why, I started going down little by little as I started learning how to balance out my meals better. And that took me a long time. That took me, about 3 years before I went fully vegan. So I think that I would want to say that more people in the majority were all reducitarians at one point or another, because even if you count vegetarianism, for example, that's a form of reducitarian too, because you're still consuming animals, right? So I feel like it's the best way to do it, and it's the healthiest way to do it, I think, too. And because you're giving yourself a little bit of chance to mess up, right? If you just put on this perfectionism, okay, I have to do it right off the bat, it becomes hard, you become demotivated, and you stop, right? But if you kind of give yourself some break and you reduce a little bit and your body gets used to it, and etc., I think that ends up being the more sustainable, effective, long-term solution.
No, I totally agree with the stuff you're saying, because in my interactions with meat eaters and vegetarians as well, that's what I say. I say it's really important that you get it right, then just do it just for the sake of it, that you want to show that I've turned vegan, or you are for that cause. I totally understand that you'd want to be motivated for that cause, and you should rightfully be so. But it shouldn't be for the harm of your diet, because I feel that's really important. And if someone, as I mentioned earlier as well, if someone's been eating a certain way for the lifestyle, for the whole generation maybe, it's very difficult to overnight, let's say, just cut out the animal protein as you mentioned, and not replace it. Some people forget to replace it, or just taking time to replace it with, let's say, other aspects such as tofu, chickpeas, or whatever their source of protein may be. So I think it's more important to get it right, and then of course you can start propagating the idea of veganism. So let's move on to, let's say, Pro Veg and the company you work for. So one of the things that you're really famous for is this whole concept of the Pro Veg Incubator. So just for the viewers, maybe if you can talk a little bit about that, and what you guys aim with this program of the Pro Veg Incubator.
Yeah, so thanks for the shout out there, because I'm actually on that project. So good to know that we're making some waves. And yeah, like I mentioned before, because we have such an ambitious mission in front of us, we're tackling it from all different sectors. One of them, like I mentioned, is political outreach. We're doing campaigns. We do some certification for vegan products in Europe as well. But we have the corporate engagement department, which is where the incubator falls under. So the corporate engagement department has a food industry and retail team that does a little bit of consulting. Some of the bigger companies that are already in place. Also some supermarkets and some retailers about how they can incorporate more plant-based options onto their stores or into their products. So they do that, and in the incubator, we also work under the corporate engagement department, but we're dealing more with innovation and entrepreneurship. So we've been in operations for about 1.5 years now, a little bit more, and we've worked with 40 companies from over 20 countries, and we've helped these companies launch about 40 products and be present in over 2,000 stores. And we're the first incubator in the world that was exclusively supporting plant-based and cultured food startups. So that's been our very specific focus. And we've been very happy that every application round, I mean, we've had more and more applications as the space continues to grow. So even though we've been very specific with the companies that we're supporting, we've still been able to recruit companies from around the world, making really interesting products. Since I've been on the project, it's been super exciting. Every new cohort brings on different teams, different ideas, different strategies, different business models, and it's just such an inspiring place to work in, because because we've been very international from the start. I mean, we've had companies from New Zealand, from India, from Russia, from Germany. Now we're working with a company in Chile. Since we've been very international from the beginning, it's really interesting to see how there's founders from all over the world, but everybody comes together for the same mission. Everybody wants to do the same thing. Everybody wants to change the way that we eat. Everybody wants to give people better options and see a better change in humanity. So that's always really inspiring and makes the work super worthwhile.
That sounds really great, and that's what like really drew me towards your company as such. But I wouldn't say many people would be aware of, let's say, the concept of food innovation as such. So just for the let's say for the layman, how would you break that down? Is it simply maybe putting out new recipes on the table that may be plant based, or is it actually going to, let's say, a more sustainable approach of, let's say, producing food which reduces to the maximum or totally cuts out any animal interaction to the food they're making? So what approach is it? Is it a more homemade approach where you put out new recipes, or is it a more sustainable approach of just looking at food in a new way?
It's definitely looking at food in a new way. It's reinventing food. And we look at all sorts of projects that are. The number one criteria. We always frame it as you have to be aligned to our mission, which is to reduce the global animal consumption. But basically, what that means is you can't have any animal products in your process. You can't.
Yeah.
I mean, if at the time of application there's something that involves some animal products, that's the first red flag for us, because we're not going to be supporting that. And so, the projects that we work with up until now, they've all really taken the challenge of accepted the challenge of innovation very, very responsibly, and they've taken it very seriously. And they've reinvented some of the food that that we were accustomed to. We've had a startup that has made, pate, out of green bananas.
Wow.
Instead of saying, who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? There's another company that's, employing a circular economy model, that they're they're growing mushrooms on residuals of agriculture residuals, and then from those mushrooms they're able to extract protein and make products out of it. So that's crazy, because that's a whole sustainable model that they're putting together, which is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. This project is still developing. Then you have all the cultured meat companies that we've been working with too, right? That they're working in labs. They're working in labs. They're using fermentation. They're growing. They're trying to establish cell lines. They're trying to develop media for the cell lines. So it's completely reinventing the way that we think of food. And as we continue to move forward, we raise our standards as well too, in terms of what we want to see from companies and from teams. What kinds of products, what kinds of materials, what kinds of technology, what kinds of missions we want to see as well. Because a lot of times, the products are really innovative, the teams are really strong, but on top of that, the teams set the bar even higher for themselves, and they put out, social projects. We've worked with a chocolate company here in Germany that for every chocolate bar that they sell, they plant one tree. So, I mean, they've planted over 1 million trees already because they've sold over 1 million chocolate bars. We're working with a company right now that is working closely with the Sea Shepherd initiative. So some of their proceeds are going to go to the Sea Shepherd initiative. So yeah, it's really nice to see how people just really want to be the change that they want to see, and really putting it forward in their companies.
That sounds lovely. The fact that, like, let's say with the chocolate example, if and something just as casual as, let's say, a chocolate, but then the person will be drawn towards that particular commodity because they feel it's contributing to a greater cause. So I feel that that's really powerful, and I think more people should actually contribute towards sustainable ways of, let's say, living in this planet, because I think the climate is changing, however many people may disagree. But yeah, I feel that movements like yours, and I feel that if more companies cooperate with you guys, or there are more incubators that are set up towards plant-based foods, or even, let's say, a more wider, broader approach to the environment, I think it'd be a great way to look at things. So let's say we talked a lot about food in this part, but is another focus for Pro Veg to also move into industries such as, let's say, the clothing industry, or industries which are also causing a lot of harm to the environment, let's say fast fashion and all these kind of movements that have come about, which are causing tremendously harmful effects to the environment. I'm not sure if, I'm just posing the question to you, are you in the pipeline of maybe approaching these projects in a later date, or are you already just in conversation with companies for having clothing lines, or maybe not? Are you just focusing on food for the moment?
Yeah, good question. So what I was mentioning earlier in terms of like some of the departments that are present in our organization, one of them is what we call V-label certification. And what it is just like a seal, or a seal of transparency, just certifying that the product that in question is vegan, right? That there's no animal byproducts, nothing involved. And now, that B-label certification has now moved towards cosmetics, because cosmetics, I mean, whether people didn't know, also involves animal products and animal testing, and etc. So we're now moving forward to that. But to answer your question right on to hit it right on the head, I mean, as an organization, as an entire organization, our focus is still on food, just because, I mean, it's quite the mission already, quite the goal, the ambition already to add on, something like fast fashion, which is also a super complex topic, very important, and also very damaging for a multitude of reasons, environmental, socially as well. I mean, in terms of wages and the list goes on. But right now, I would say from the organization's standpoint, I mean, the focus is still on food. And through the certification, they've moved a bit into cosmetics, but there are really great initiatives now that are popping up more and more, looking into more sustainable materials. So clothing, yes, but also more sustainable materials in terms of seating in cars, for example, replacing leather seats, or maybe more packaging things, etc. So there's some initiatives popping up more and more focused on that. But as of now, our focus still is on food.
Yeah, I mean, I think, whenever someone asks me, I mean, some of them aren't aware. Some of them really associate veganism only to the food that they eat. They don't look at, let's say, the broader aspects of, as you mentioned, cosmetics, or the accessories we wear or use in a daily life. I think they are equally as important if you are trying to instill a vegan lifestyle as the food you eat. So I totally try to implement that in the way I live, and I try to propagate that with the people as well. But a question that many of the people generally ask me, and I answer back to them, but I'd like to hear your perspective, is that they say that, let's say the world went vegan on a particular day, what would happen to the environment then? Do you think it would actually be as sustainable and as all rose and all happy thing that we are actually talking about, or would it actually be detrimental for the environment just so that everybody in the world went vegan?
I mean, if everybody in the world went vegan, I mean, would it really create a change?
Let's say, would it be sustainable? Do you think there should be a gradual rise in the number of vegans in the world, or do you think that if everyone in the world went vegan tomorrow, will that be good?
I mean, I mean, would it be good or bad? I mean, on the surface, I would say, yes. I mean, yes, of course, but it's not that easy, right? It's not that easy because, I mean, obviously, you need to transition so many different jobs. You have to transition so many different jobs, and you have to just restructure a bunch of systems and processes that are ineffective, right now anyway, but they still, some thought needs to be put into, okay, we've been doing this, for, X amount of years, but now all of a sudden we're not. What are we going to do instead? So I feel, in the nutshell, if everybody went to a plant-based diet, I mean, yes, that would be my first response. But I know it's not that easy. You have to figure out, how you're going to transition people's jobs, how you're going to reallocate, resources, how, because you cannot just say, there's no more meat anymore, but you have to give other alternatives too. You have to give other options. You have to, have that already in place too. I don't know that there's, enough tofu on the shelves right now, or beans or whatever for everybody to just go for that. It have to, it have to balance itself out. So I think for that matter, it's why that the change is a bit gradual, and it takes a little bit of time. But obviously, yes. I mean, in a perfect world, I would want, the goal that, maybe you and I are both working toward to come as soon as possible.
No, I share the similar insights. I'd say that for me, obviously, it'd be really idealistic. It'd be great for me that I see a world where everyone's vegan. But I understand that that's pretty futuristic. That's pretty idealistic on my standpoint. And hence, I do agree with the whole aspect of it has to be gradual, because things such as you talked about, let's say there are so many people who actually have jobs in the animal industry. For them to transition out, only when there will be a gradual decrease in the number of meat consumers, will those jobs be transitioned fairly to other parts of the world. But a particular question I have here is that with the stuff you're doing with the whole plant based food industry, and you're trying to get innovative ideas in plant based foods, are you also trying to maybe push plant based foods when you're actually going and talking about these in front of, let's say, animal food industries? Are you actually going to animal food companies and saying that, here, these are some interesting ideas we have, would you consider maybe implementing it, or just hearing us out? Have you guys thought about that?
Definitely. I mean, in my department, which is the incubator, we don't do that personally, but as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, we have a team also under the corporate engagement department that does exactly that. So they do consulting for big companies that say, hey, this is your ingredient list right now. You're using milk powder, for example, in your cookies. Instead of using milk powder, would you consider doing these alternatives? Or go working with retailers or supermarkets and be, hey, we've noticed that you don't have many alternatives in your supermarkets. Let me give you an extensive list of really nice plant-based cheeses, or let me give you a really extensive list of like really nice, plant-based meats or whatever. And, they work with them to see what makes sense for them and how they can transition. So, even though that on the surface, these companies are not in line with what we're trying to do, not in line with our mission, it doesn't necessarily that they have to be on a different team, right? I mean, it's just how you can work together and bring people onto your side, right? Because people are not gonna listen, to people who are being critical and just throwing fingers in their face. But hey, let's sit down, let's work together, let's see what's on the table for you, let's see what's on the table for us, and how we can make it work, and how we can find a common goal for the both of us. So I think that this department that I'm mentioning does have that focus, and they've been quite successful in working with some companies already and pushing the space there, because these big companies are a bit harder to nudge and push in that direction, because they've just been doing things for the same way for so many years, that they don't question their ways of doing things.
Yeah, I mean that's the question I wanted to ask you. Is that basically, is it really hard to, let's say, push your ideas or push, let's say, these alternatives that you're suggesting to these companies? So yeah, I mean, I guess you've answered that particularly well.
I mean, it's tough. It's tough, but I mean, I think it's like we talked about earlier. These meat companies are not dumb, right? They know that people's behaviors are changing. People are becoming more aware of the detriments of eating animals, and the benefits of eating plants. So they also wanna tap into this, right? I mean, because these companies don't want to get left behind, and they want to be part of it too. I mean, you see some of these big companies like Tyson, for example, which is one of the global meat producers, and they're now investing. They've invested in Beyond Meat. They've invested in cultured meat. So they don't want to be left behind. So they do it because it makes sense for them financially. But at the same time, if a product tastes good, then really that's all people care about, and companies care about too. So I mean, if you, as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, as a startup, have a really good tasting product, and you can give it at a price that is affordable, then I mean, there's very few reasons, aside from just plain, really wanting to not support the movement, of why people would reject something like that. So I think it's partly a financial incentive that these companies have, but at the same time, you start seeing more impressive products coming onto the market that end up convincing them as well.
Well, that's really interesting, and that's really positive for me as a vegan to hear that actually these companies are actually looking at steps, and it's totally justifiable when you put out numbers such as, even though they're only 5% of, let's say, the food industry that's plant based currently, but with the projections that are there, it's just going to increase in the years to come. So one question that's often pointed towards vegans is that, and they often get into these debates with, let's say, the farmers. So do you guys really have, let's say, what do you guys say when you interact with, let's say, an animal farmer? Because from my interactions, I'd say they are very passionate about the work they do, and justifiably so, because they grow these animals from a very young age and they're very connected to it. Even though some of them slaughter them later on, but they still feel that's justifiable to run their families and run their business. Do you have, let's say, these conversations with animal farmers or farmers in general? And if so, what do you tell them?
I mean, well, first off, I think it's important to make the distinction between the kinds of farmers, right? Because I mean, in the books that we read as kids, right, in the children's book, about all these animals singing happily on the farm. I mean, it's not really the case, right? It's not how most meat in supermarkets is produced. So, I mean, for a farmer to say, a farmer who's leading, in industrial agriculture, for them to say they care about animals, I mean, no. I mean, no, they don't. I mean, don't try to tell me that, because I mean, you're saying one thing and you're doing the complete opposite. You're not going to convince me, right? Maybe on a smaller scale, I mean, that makes a bit, that could make a bit more sense, and for whatever, reasons they may have, or whatever moral judgment they might want for themselves, in terms of, how they go about, raising the animals and then consuming them is up to them. But I think the distinction between the farmers is important, because, I think that the only one that could maybe have an argument that, they care about the animals that they raise are these smaller ones. And how they justify for themselves that they end up consuming these animals that they raise is up to them, right? But no, we don't really come across many farmers, at least not in my department. I think that's a sector that needs to be explored more, and you do see really nice initiatives now being put out that are trying to rather condemn, these farmers, trying to help them transition and try to give them tools and resources to make that easier. So I feel like these initiatives are the exact thing that we need, because organizations like mine, for example, and other organizations that I'm familiar with do not have this focus right now. But I think it's really important, right? Because I mean, it's if we're trying to get all these corporations on our side, we're trying to get these politicians on our side, these governments on our side. I mean, let's get the farmers on our side too.
Yeah.
So. Because I mean, obviously, anybody who feels that their livelihood is being threatened, they're going to push back. I mean, they're going to push back. I mean, if them feeding their families, I mean, is being threatened, of course they're going to push back. But I mean, if you work with them on how to make a transition, that they're not going to have, their livelihood threatened, but instead, have an opportunity to do something different and do something better, not only for the planet and for the animals, but also for themselves, right? I feel like these are all very important things, and that's why I think that these initiatives that are popping up are super important.
Alan, there's one thing that I've often heard, let's say what the farmers say in the acts that they do. It's not that I support this by any standard, because I understand that it's totally wrong. It makes no sense as an argument. So they say that the acts that we do to, let's say, these cows or these chickens or pigs, whatever the animal may be, is so that we protect them with, let's say, animal extinction. Because if we don't, let's say, keep breeding these cows, if we don't keep breeding these chickens, then these chickens won't be able to last in the wild, let's say. So do you have any particular thoughts around that particular question?
I mean, this one's probably a little bit out of my not comfort zone, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, this one I'm not super well versed in, but I would say that I mean, because of the space that's available now in terms of the ones that we as humanity has left, available for wild animals is not much, which is super sad in itself. But I mean, at the same time, if I mean, these animals are not, we're not capturing these animals and slaughtering them. We're breeding them.
Yeah.
We're breeding them to eat them, and when you just don't breed them, then you won't have all these pigs and cows invading our cities and towns, etc. I mean, if you just don't breed them, they're not there. And so maybe it's not the right answer, but that's what comes to my mind on that.
No, that's totally justifiable, because I think there's still a lot of research to be done in just finding a sustainable way to do things. Because I understand the argument they're trying to put forward. Let's say that that if you put, let's say, a genetically breeded cow, let's say, which is breeded to our conditions, it's not let's say biologically adept to, let's say, live in the wild, because it's always used to eating from, let's say, a spoon fed thing that it's given, or just grass that's already laid out for it. So I think that is a very good let's say point for many vegans to consider, because sometimes vegans just, let's say, spit out facts in the air so that they don't want to, let's say, go away from their agenda, which I feel is bad, because I feel that you have to explore both sides to, let's say, come to a conclusion that's good for society as a result.
I mean, I think that it's always, I mean, with veganism too, but I mean, I think with everything in life, you do need to try and be as open to both sides. but I do think that to a certain extent, I mean, not that I would ever say that vegans are victims. I think that, yes, vegans are in a minority, but at the same time, you know, at least in my personal experiences, I know that I had to have a lot of opportunities and a lot of, privileges to be able to come to that lifestyle. So it's hard for me to call, vegans victims, because in my personal experience, it's not the case. But I do think that vegans are held to a higher standard in terms of they need to know all their facts. Right? They need to know, if we're not going to eat meat, then what are we going to eat, and how is that going to work, but how, all the animals are going to be in the wild. And it was like, man, I don't have the answers, right? I mean, I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. Oh, then okay, then don't be coming to me about veganism. I mean, man, I know the important things, right? I know the important things, that it's scientifically proven that it causes deforestation, that it messes with the animals, that it messes with your health. I mean, those are the things that I know, and I can expand on most of those points. But there's going to be things that we don't know, and even though we're not entirely victims, I do think that we get held to a higher standard, and we need to know all the front and backs and sides to all the arguments that get brought up, and if you don't know them, I mean, you get discredited, which if we applied that logic to everything, then there'd be no experts around on anything. So
I totally agree with that. I mean, I'd say that, okay, so from what I've seen this as well, so I've seen vegans who don't, let's say, go about telling that you should be vegan to everybody that they meet, but they just, let's say, carry on with their lifestyle, and they feel that, for me, let's say, veganism is the way I want to live my life, and that should be it. But then there again, there'll be meat eaters who start coming to you, why do you eat that way, or why do you eat this way? And then when you try to say that, I don't know, man, I don't know everything, as you mentioned, they'd say that, and why are you vegan? Why don't you try meat products? I'd say from my perspective, at least, if you're trying to, let's say, push the word of veganism towards, let's say, meat eaters or vegetarians, I'd say in that you should be more well versed with the whole concepts. Not to say that you can know everything, because obviously we are just humans at the end of the day, so we will miss out on stuff, and we will always keep learning. So yeah, I'd say that when you are trying to push the agenda, then you should know a lot more about veganism, but it shouldn't always be that you shouldn't always say that, okay, that's something I don't know, and I will look into it. I think we should be more open to saying that.
Definitely, and at the same time, I feel like, but I mean, you would think that I mean, I wouldn't encourage you to, I don't know, eat cornflakes if I didn't have my own experience with cornflakes, So I think that already, if you're encouraging it, is why you're doing it, what benefits you saw for yourself. And I think with veganism, you should be informed on more of the numbers revolving it, because it's such a big issue, and it involves so many other different factors, that if you could just lay it all on the table, it makes a much stronger case. So yeah, I agree with you there too. It's a balance.
Yeah. No, I mean, Alan, I had a great pleasure speaking to you today. I mean, I think we've covered a lot about veganism and what, let's say, your company is doing, the company you work for, rather, in aspects about just bringing innovative ideas to plant-based products. Because as you mentioned, that many people, when they think about plant-based products, like, you're going to eat leaves, you're going to eat grass. I mean, how are you going to get your protein? I mean, those are some of the most prominent questions that come up. And I think that if you are bringing, let's say, attractive, innovative ideas towards thinking about plant-based foods and just how we generally eat foods, I think that'd be really good for society. So just before you go, if you have anything you'd like to plug, anything where people can find the work you do, the company you work for, feel free.
Yeah, great. So the company is Pro Veg International, and you can find it at proveginternational.com. More specifically, if you want to read up on some of the companies that we work with, we work with companies from all over the world, or all across the world, I should say. And you can find us at provegincubator.com. and you can look at the different companies there and get links to their websites as well. So yeah, that's where you get more information. And thank you for having me on too. It was great speaking to you, and really cool that you're putting together this project and this initiative. And I'm wishing you the best of luck, and hopefully you're able to continue providing nice content and different speakers and different perspectives to your audience.